Imagine a room in the court of Jerusalem. An anonymous scribe, someone whose name we will never know, picks up a scroll. He has spent his entire life collecting short sayings, observations about how life works, moral guideposts, you could call them. But he does not begin with a commandment. He does not begin with obey your father. He does not promise that wisdom will make you rich. He takes the ancient world's search for wisdom and places God, not the king, not the philosopher, not the self, at its center. And that shift in perspective is why Proverbs 1 may be the most important chapter in the entire Bible for understanding how Hebrew thought really works. Subscribe to the channel if this kind of study of the original text helps you see the scriptures in a new way. And before we continue, tell me in the comments in just one word, what do you think separates knowledge from wisdom? I want to read every answer. The opening verses of Proverbs chapter 1 verses 1 through 7 are what Hebrew scholars call a programmatic prologue. That is a technical way of saying this is not just an introduction. It is a manifesto. It is a statement of purpose that redefines the book you are about to read. The text begins like this: the Proverbs of Solomon, son of David, king of Israel, to know wisdom and instruction, to understand words of insight, to receive instruction in wise behavior, righteousness, justice, and fairness. Then it says something directed straight to the young and inexperienced, to give wisdom to the simple, knowledge and good judgment to the young. But it does not stop there. It says that even the wise should listen and increase their learning, and those with understanding should gain guidance. Then comes verse 7, the turning point of the entire book. The fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom. Fools despise wisdom and instruction. Stop here. Go back to verse 1. It says the Proverbs of Solomon. Notice what it does not say. It does not say the commandments of Solomon. It does not say the laws of Solomon. It says Proverbs. The Hebrew word is mishal. It comes from the root meshal, which means to compare or to place one thing beside another. A proverb is not an order handed down from above. It is a comparison, an observation, a mirror that allows you to see yourself. Not a command. A mirror. And that is revolutionary. In the ancient Near East, when a king compiled a text, the goal was usually to establish authority. Hammurabi carved his laws into stone so everyone would know who held the power. But Solomon, or whoever wrote in his name, did something different. He collected observations about how the world works. Not commands. Observations. And that changes everything about the way you read what comes next. The fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom. Fools despise wisdom and instruction. This is where most modern readers lose the thread. The Hebrew word for fear here is yira. And yira can include fear, but it means much more than being afraid. Here it carries the meaning of reverence, awe, a posture of the soul before something holy. But there is a detail here that changes everything. The text says the fear of the Lord is the beginning of knowledge, not wisdom. The Hebrew word is dat, not jokma. And that distinction matters. Dat is the raw material, perception, awareness, the ability to recognize what is real. Jokma, wisdom, is what you build from that raw material. Proverbs 9:10 will later say that the fear of the Lord is also the beginning of jokma. But here, at the very beginning, the writer starts with something even more basic. You cannot even perceive reality correctly without reverence. Even the facts themselves become distorted without it. The text says that yira is the beginning, the reshit, of that knowledge. And reshit can mean beginning, but here it carries a much deeper meaning. It points to the foundation, the ground on which everything else is built. Think of it this way. Wisdom is the entire building, the walls, the rooms, and the roof. But yira, that reverent awe before God, is not just the first brick you lay. It is the ground itself. It is what makes the entire building possible. Without it, everything else eventually collapses. That is not a metaphor the text uses lightly. It is the entire architecture. And here the text draws a line with remarkable precision between two things that are easy to confuse. There is technical wisdom, called jokma in Hebrew. It is the ability to recognize patterns, understand how things work, and make smart decisions. It is practical. It is useful. It can be taught in a classroom. But real wisdom, the kind that truly matters, begins when you understand that all of that technical intelligence rests on a foundation that is not technical at all. It rests on a relationship with God. The writer is building an argument, and each verse adds another piece. Verse 2 says, to know wisdom and instruction. The Hebrew word for instruction is musar. And musar is not simply punishment. It means training, instruction, correction, and the willingness to be shaped, to learn from what went wrong. Verse 3 expands the picture, not only wisdom but also righteousness, justice, and fairness. The writer is saying that if you read this book, you will not only learn how to make smart decisions, you will learn how to make moral decisions. Verse 4 says, to give wisdom to the simple. The Hebrew word for simple is petaim. It does not mean stupid. It means open, inexperienced, vulnerable. The writer is saying that this book is especially for people who have not yet built defenses against the world. It will teach you to recognize traps before you fall into them. Then comes the turning point. Verse 5 says, let the wise listen and increase their learning, and let the person with understanding gain guidance. The writer is not saying that this book is only for beginners. He is saying that even if you are already wise, this book will make you wiser. That is a bold claim. It is like saying this book never becomes outdated. It is for everyone. Verse 6 says, to understand proverbs and parables, the sayings of the wise and their riddles. The text is telling us that proverbs are like puzzles. They are not direct answers. They are questions in disguise. And if you learn how to read them correctly, you will begin to see patterns that other people completely miss. Then comes verse 7, and the tone changes completely. Suddenly, you are no longer in the world of useful tools. You are in the world of faith, reverence, and the fundamental decision that shapes everything else. It is as if the writer is saying, listen, I am about to give you a great deal of practical advice in the pages ahead. But before you read any of it, you need to understand one thing. That advice only works if you understand that wisdom does not begin with you. It begins with God. Share this video with someone who knows the book of Proverbs by heart, but has never seen what is happening beneath the surface of the text. Sometimes the difference between reading the Bible and truly understanding it is just one more layer of depth. And stay with me, because what comes next is what most people completely overlook. Verse 7 draws a line between two kinds of people. And the second half of the verse is what makes so many people stop and think. Fools despise wisdom and instruction. The fool in Proverbs, called evil in Hebrew, is not someone who lacks wisdom. It is someone who is morally stubborn and refuses correction. And here is what stops most people. Rejecting wisdom is not an intellectual mistake. It is a moral decision. It is an act of rebellion. A fool is not someone who does not know. A fool is someone who refuses to know. Someone who looks at the evidence and says, I do not care. The distinction is not between intelligent and unintelligent. It is between being open and being closed. And that completely changes what this book is saying about intelligence. In the modern world, intelligence means cognitive ability, the ability to solve problems, recognize patterns, and think clearly. But in Proverbs, intelligence means something different. It is the ability to see reality as it truly is, to understand how the world really works, and to make decisions that lead toward life instead of away from it. And that ability is not mainly a matter of intellect. It is a matter of character. It is a matter of being willing to be taught. Verse 5 says, let the wise listen. It does not say let the wise read. It says let the wise listen. Listening requires openness. It requires the willingness to be corrected. The Hebrew word translated as despise in verse 7 is baz. It means to treat something as worthless, to look at it and dismiss it. And what matters is that this is not accidental. It is not ignorance. It is a choice. It is someone who sees wisdom and says, that is not worth my time. That is a moral act. A fool is not someone who cannot know. A fool is someone who chooses not to know. Someone who chooses not to grow and not to change. And in Proverbs, that choice always leads to predictable consequences. It is worth pausing to understand the difference between yira and ordinary fear. Hebrew also uses words like pachad for horror or terror, the kind of fear you feel when you see a lion. That is a survival response. Yira often carries a much broader meaning. It is what you feel when you stand before something greater than yourself, more powerful than you, wiser than you, and you recognize it. When Abraham stands before God in Genesis 22, the text says he had yira. He was not running away. He was not screaming. He was standing in complete reverence. The psalmist says in Psalm 111, the fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom. He is saying the same thing as Proverbs 1. True wisdom begins when you recognize that there is something greater than yourself. And that goes against everything the modern world teaches. Every self-help book on the shelf says, trust yourself, believe in your own reasoning. But Proverbs 1 says something different. Be confident, yes, but let that confidence be rooted in your relationship with God, not in yourself. Why does all of this matter beyond Proverbs? Because chapter 1 establishes an intellectual framework that appears throughout the Bible. In Genesis, the tree of knowledge is not a tree of ignorance, it is a tree of wisdom. And the temptation of Adam and Eve is not ignorance. It is wisdom without reverence. It is the ability to choose without submitting to God. In the Psalms, the psalmist says over and over, "Teach me your ways." He does not say, "Give me intelligence." He says, "Teach me." There is an attitude of openness there, of humility, of being willing to be shaped. In Job, the entire book explores what happens when genuine wisdom, the kind rooted in reverence, reaches a wall that human reasoning cannot cross. Job does not lack yira. Job 1:1 makes that clear. It says he feared God and turned away from evil, but his intelligence cannot explain what is happening to him. And the book asks the very question Proverbs 1 has been preparing us for. Is there a wisdom beyond what human reasoning can reach? In Deuteronomy, Moses lays the choice before the people. Today I have set before you life and death, blessing and curse. Choose life. It is the same framework. You have the ability to choose, but only one choice is truly wise, and it requires submitting to God. And when we come to the New Testament, Jesus often teaches through parables, comparisons, and stories that require openness, not just intelligence. In Matthew 11:25, he praises the Father for hiding these things from the wise and learned and revealing them to little children. The wisdom of the world, technical intelligence, the ability to recognize patterns, is not the same as the wisdom of God. In fact, it often works against it. And that is exactly what Proverbs 1 has been saying from the very beginning. The word jokma, meaning wisdom, comes from a root that means to be skillful or to have expertise. In the Old Testament, it is used to describe the craftsmen who built the tabernacle. It is used to describe the magicians of Egypt. It is used to describe someone who knows how to do something well. But jokma by itself is not moral. An Egyptian magician can have jokma. A con artist can have jokma. Someone who is highly skilled at deception can have jokma. What transforms jokma from a simple skill into a moral virtue is that it is rooted in yira, that reverent awe before God. When we read Proverbs, we find practical advice about money, relationships, and work. Those lessons are useful, but they are not the main point. The point is that those lessons only work if you apply them from a position of humility before God. That is why verse 7 is not a side note. It is the key that unlocks everything else. There is one more connection the writer makes that is easy to miss. Verse 3 does not only mention wisdom, it also mentions justice, righteousness, and fairness. Why? Because according to Proverbs, you cannot be truly wise without being just. Wisdom that is not used in the service of justice is not wisdom, it is cleverness. A criminal can be clever, a con artist can be smart, but they are not wise because their intelligence is not directed toward what is right. True jokma, the kind rooted in the fear of God, always leans toward justice. It always leans toward what is right. That is one of the qualities that gives Proverbs its unique moral and theological strength. Other writings say, this is how to succeed. Proverbs says, this is how to succeed in a way that is righteous. When you see Proverbs 1 as a whole, you understand what it is really doing. It is not giving you a list of good advice. It is giving you the operating system that makes the advice work. The writer is saying, this book is not a collection of tips. It is an exploration of how God designed the world. It is an invitation to see reality the way God sees it. That is what makes it different from the other wisdom traditions of the ancient Near East. When a king put together a book of wisdom, it was usually to say, I am wise. Do what I tell you. But Solomon, or whoever wrote in his name, did something completely different. He collected observations about how the world works and then said, here is the foundation beneath all of it, the fear of God. I am not asking you to trust me. I am asking you to trust God. If you understand Proverbs 1, you understand how the entire Bible works. Throughout Scripture, there is a constant tension between two things, human knowledge and God's wisdom, and the Bible keeps making the same point. Human knowledge is useful, but it is not enough. It must be submitted to the wisdom of God. In Genesis, Adam and Eve gain the knowledge of good and evil, but they do not have the wisdom to use it, and that is what leads to their downfall. In the Psalms, the psalmist says again and again, I do not trust in my own strength, I trust in God. The prophets say that the people trust in their own understanding, but that will not save them. And in the New Testament, Jesus keeps telling his disciples, you do not understand, you do not see. You need to learn to see the way I see. All of that, every bit of it, is already contained in Proverbs 1. It is all packed into just 7 verses. So here is what I would ask you to do this week. Read Proverbs 1, the entire chapter, not just the first 7 verses. Read it slowly, read it twice if you can. And as you read, ask yourself one simple question. Where am I being the fool? Not where am I uninformed? Where am I choosing not to know? Where am I trusting my own understanding instead of submitting it to the wisdom of God? Do not answer that question too quickly. This is not a question you simply answer. It is a question you live with. Because Proverbs 1 is not just a text to read. It is a text that invites you to change, to see the world in a new way, and to submit your understanding to something greater than yourself. The scribe in Jerusalem did not begin with a commandment. He began with a mirror. And nearly 3,000 years later, that mirror still works. In just one word, what do you think separates knowledge from wisdom? Leave your answer in the comments. If someone in your life has been wrestling with that question, if they have wondered whether knowing more is the same as being wise, send them this video. It may be the thing that changes the way they see everything. Subscribe to the channel as we continue exploring the scriptures through the original text. May the God who built wisdom into the very structure of reality meet you wherever you are today. God bless you.